good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Drawing with Michael. Michael Clarida Arts, and today we're doing part 2 of a series that I really have been meaning to do for a long time, and that is the basics of Photoshop. You know, somebody coming in that basically doesn't really understand a lot, doesn't really know a lot, wants to get into digital illustration, and Photoshop is the pathway that they want to use. Now, there are many pathways that you can use. However, for this particular video, we will be utilizing Adobe's Photoshop. If you are landing on this particular video and you see the number 2 on here, definitely go back to the number 1. I'll put that in the description, link in the description, and you don't necessarily have to have number 1 to be able to do this particular tutorial / video, but it is recommended. So, I've started a document. You guys have seen me do this before, but for the layman, if you are landing on here and you haven't watched the first video, then obviously you don't know how to create a document. So click that link and it'll take you on how to set up a document. So we are going to learn a few different tools today. One of them being the pen tool. Over here on the left-hand side is the tool bar. There are a lot of tools over here, and you know, coming in as somebody that doesn't understand user interface and understand how this is set up, this is the way Photoshop's been kind of set up since the beginning. You have the tool palette over here and all these floating windows that are surrounding your document here, your document panel. All of those have kind of gone all the way back to 1994, 95, 96. And this user interface is very familiar. You can change your tools to be stacked if you like, similar or like this. And I believe you can custom organize your tools the way that you want them. But we're not going to get into that. Literally, this is the way that they're set up whenever I open the document and open the piece of software. So therefore, we're going to go ahead and leave them like this. Today, I had somebody ask me as far as setting up an illustration or a piece of art and putting in color flats. And you're like, color flats, what are those? So color flat would be a piece of artwork that doesn't have any light or shade on it. You know, the color flats would be local color. So we're going to do that today. We're going to get into the freeform pen tool. So pen tool's over here. So whenever I long hold, it brings up a little sub menu. And remember we talked about how every single time I change a tool, up here in this little tab window up here, little tab information changes. So if I were to go to the pen tool and then I go to the type tool, everything changes up here. Again, if I go to the sponge tool, everything will change up here, so on and so forth. You get the idea. So here's the pen tool, and you long hold, and it brings up a submenu here with other types of pen tools in it. We're also going to look at the elliptical marquee tool and the rectangular marquee tool. And the marquee tool is right here. So we'll go ahead and long hold. And what's nice is if you get confused, if you hover your cursor over it, it'll give you that submenu right here. And a lot of times, if you, depending on what machine you're on, if you hover your cursor over it, it will give you a little explanation of what the tool is. So here's the rectangular marquee tool and the elliptical marquee tool. We're going to learn a little bit about those. We're going to learn a little bit about the color boxes right here. I didn't really explain a lot about what's going on with these little boxes down here, and we're going to learn a little bit about that. Then the lasso, like a cowboy. That's exactly what it looks like. So we have the lasso tool right here. We'll long hold. We have the lasso tool and the polygonal lasso tool. Those things are similar in use, and we'll talk about those here in just a moment. But what I wanted to really get into to begin with has to do with what one of my users has requested, which would basically be putting in color flats and utilizing the tools that I've already given you. So right now I've got my window set up to where it's not full screen. I like full screen, so I'm going to go ahead and press F, which is pre-programmed into my XP pen remote. So this is just like pressing F. So if I press it once, it goes to full screen with menus, little tab windows. And if I press it again, it'll go to full screen without any of that. And this is useful whenever you guys want to do sketch work and just want to have a blank slate and you're not really going to change your tools a lot. This is nice, mainly because if I have multiple windows open, I can see what's in those multiple windows and switch back and forth. If I were to do this, hit that F again, obviously I'm just looking at the document that is currently open and at the forefront. I've already done a sketch, so we're going to go ahead and look over here at the layers palette on the right hand side, and you can put this anywhere you want to. I just like it over here on the right because I'm right-handed, and I've got things set up to where I'm comfortable I'm comfortable with the way things are. You can set them up however you want to. And what's really cool is if you go up here on the right-hand side, in the upper right-hand side, and you click this, you can actually save new workspace. You can title it, and every single time that you open it, you basically can go up here. It'll default to the last workspace that you had open. So I have painting, and I rearranged everything the way that I wanted it. So, and you can specify how you want it in case you have multiple users on the same machine using the same program. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I've already done a really quick sketch for you guys. I added a layer, and that's what I sketched it on. Now, I had also somebody ask me as far as the line work goes, since I added a layer and it defaults to transparency, basically I sketched on a transparent layer. Unless I fill it with something such as a color, that's what it's going to default to. Okay, the background, obviously, whenever I open the document, so let's go ahead and let's say File, New. Over here on the right-hand side, Background Contents, I can specify what color I want. And that's what I did. I specified as a mid-tone gray, and that's what I got. And I added a layer, and I sketched on it. Pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and put this layers over here on the right-hand side. This is our rough sketch, okay? So what I would basically do as an illustrator and somebody that wants to refine the sketch is I would go in and I would add another layer, okay? And that's done by choosing this little icon, looks like a plus down here. Now you can do a myriad of different things. You can add an FX on that particular layer. You can add a layer group, and of course you can add a layer. And if you wanted to just get rid of a layer, then you would hit this little trash can. Pretty simple, right? So let's go ahead up here to the layer that I want to work on. Actually, the layer that I want to pull back on the value, and that has to do with opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and pull back on that value to right about there. And I'm just going to show you what I would normally do. And then I would go to the layer that I want to actually do my inking on. I would move this out of the way. I would go over here to the left-hand side, and I would hit this paintbrush. The paintbrush, and you saw all of these items change. The paintbrush is now active. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull up all of my brushes. There's a quick key for that, but we're not going to get into the quick keys because, again, a lot of people have different quick keys, and you can pre-program and you can program your quick keys, and you can have different actions. I just want to make sure that you understand there's kind of a default setting for Photoshop, and I want to have you take that path first, and then as you progress and you learn what the quick keys are, then you can go ahead and utilize those. And occasionally I'll tell you, like with the F would be full screen, and if you hit tab, okay, actually I don't have the ability to do that because I don't have a keyboard hooked up, so we're not going to get into that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the brush. And then since I like having this particular brush with a little bit of texture to it because it gives the drawings a little bit more of a pencil life. And you see I used my XP pen remote to go ahead and change the brush size. Again, because that's pre-programmed into the XP pen remote. You can always hit Command, I think it's Command Alt together, and you can slide back and forth, which will actually change the brush size. Tried to answer my wife here because she was traveling in the snow today. Okay, so what I would basically do now is I would go in and I would refine this sketch based on how I thought this particular character would look. And I would go in and spend probably 20 minutes refining the sketch, not tracing. You got to understand whenever you do something like this that tracing is not something that you blindly do, especially, you know, whenever you're refining something. Refine means to change, means to make better according to your vision. And I would basically go in and start messing around and changing things, maybe his eyebrows up a little bit further, so on and so forth. It's called pushing the pose. You push the pose. So that's what I would do, okay? We're not getting into that today, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that layer. I'm going to go back to my base layer, because again, we're doing color flat block in. I'm going to add a layer. By default, it goes on top. If I want it to go underneath, all I have to do is hit the Control, and then I have the layer underneath. So by default, no buttons pushed, it goes on top, okay? I'm basically, whenever you see that layer disappear, instead of me going and selecting it and hitting the trash can, I'm Control Z, or Command Z, excuse me. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit Control, and I'm going to click that plus, and now it's on the bottom, okay? So here's where the experience comes in, okay? I'm not going to utilize my experience to the extent where you get lost. What I'm going to basically do is show you the way that I do it, and you can basically find the path that you can do it. So I'm going to show you a couple ways that you can do color fill block in. I typically, because of the way that I work, I will come over here to this tool, okay? This is the lasso tool. I like the lasso tool because it gives me a lot of freedom as far as drawing goes. It's very similar to drawing in that respect. When you see me zooming in, by the way, this is a feature that Photoshop has, okay? And, you know, you hit space bar and Control, and you zoom in and out, which is really convenient. And then I'll come over and I'll click my space bar, which again moves the drawing. So this is kind of the workflow that I do whenever I'm drawing in Photoshop. You'll see me zoom in and out, you'll see me move, and then finally, whenever I'm doing color blocking or sketching, you'll see me click this button right here, which looks like a hand turning a piece of paper, and that has to do with the rotation. Okay? The rotation is important because I can move this, the entire computer, but I don't want to. I just want to use my canvas rotation tool, okay? And you're like, well, how do I get back? There's a very easy way. So I have my button pushed, which is basically the letter R on the keyboard. And if I want it to come back to neutral, so that would be the default of where it, see it's got like a little compass? The default, I would hit Shift. See how it snaps? Snaps. And it'll snap depending on where it is on the axis. So here it is 90 degrees, here it is 45 degrees, and here it is 90 degrees. Okay? All right, so color flats. Let's go ahead and make sure we're on the right layer. Now this is something that I think is overlooked a lot of times in these tutorials. Layer management. Layer management is important because you want specific layers not to be marked on. And what can inadvertently happen in the midst of you going through and drawing and doing things, you can draw on the wrong layer or a layer that you don't desire to mark on very quickly. So what I'm going to do with this layer, I'm going to go ahead and lock it. You see this little lock? And now, if I decide that I'm drawing, and I inadvertently forget to go back to the layer that I really want to be on, and I inadvertently go back to my sketch layer, I go to draw on it, and I can't, because look, whenever I go to put the cursor, there's a little circle, like a little Ghostbuster symbol, little circle with a slash through it. So I can't do anything. And then it's going to tell me when I try to do it, it's going to say, cannot use the tool brush because the layer is locked. Okay, so now I'm going to go back underneath and I'm going to use that lasso tool. Now, the lasso tool is really fun and it's very fast. And, you know, I just want to iterate to you guys that there's a couple ways that I can do this. This is the way that I typically use. Okay, so I'm going to grab a mid-tone gray, maybe a little bit darker than the background. Okay, so layer, select, deselect. And you see whenever I go ahead and I press down and I drag in any shape that I want, and I come back to where I started, it will basically now have the marching ants. Now I haven't filled it with anything. It creates a selection. Now this is handy in photographs. It's handy in coloring. It's handy in creating shapes. So if I want to go ahead, since it is a selection, I can do a lot of things with this. So if I edit, fill, it's going to ask me some questions. A submenu comes up. So let's go back. So I've got it selected. Edit, up here in the tab, up top, edit, fill. It's going to ask me some questions. It's going to ask me foreground, background, a color, content aware. Oh my gosh, that's a really interesting process that the computer uses the surrounding pixels to fill the area. And it's really helpful in getting rid of blemishes, in color matching, and it uses surrounding pixels and the entire document or the layer, I believe on the layer, to go ahead and fill that area. And the computer kind of makes up the, you know, the algorithm makes up the image and the shape, not the shape, but the image for you. You can, you know, we come down here and they got some more selections, a pattern that you can select. But what I'm going to do, see, like foreground. Okay, so this is where these boxes over on the left-hand side. So it's going to ask you foreground or background color. So in Photoshop, so let's go ahead and cancel. We're going to come over here. Now, if you notice, I've got this film on here today. My apologies for that. This is very temporary. My computer screen started malfunctioning, I believe, because of it scratched or something. So I put this film on here also for glare. So foreground, background. Remember, Photoshop works in layers, but it also, in terms of color, it's going to treat things foreground and background. And this dynamic, not only it happens to do with fill and color, but it also has to do with certain brushes. So certain brushes will take advantage of these two colors. But again, we're not going to get into that. I don't want to mess you up. So right here, you can set a background color. I click it once and it brings up the color picker and it specifies background color. I can also click the one in the front, foreground color. And it's going to always ask you, and this is very important whenever you're understanding, again, layer management and color and how to fill things whenever doing color flats. So right now, I've got my foreground set to kind of a mid-tone gray, a little bit darker than the background. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, and we're going to drag this back over here. Okay, and then edit. Fill. Now look, it already gives you the quick key. So if you want to program a quick key for fill, you can do that. You can do it and program it into your brush, I'm sorry, your stylus, your quick key remote, or on your keyboard, you just hit Shift F5, or I'm sorry, F5, and it'll bring up the fill menu. Do you want foreground or background? So fill, edit, see, foreground, boom. So now we're going to hit deselect. If I was on a keyboard, it would just be D, Control D. Make sure, because I'm so used to doing, yeah, Control D. Doing quick keys, it's a muscle memory. So what we've done is we've created a shape using our lasso tool, and we've filled it with the foreground color. So let's go back, and we're going to edit, fill. Now we're going to do background color. Oh, okay. Select, deselect. Okay. So now we've filled it with the existing background color. And I can change these colors as I need to. So we're going to go back. Now we're going to use it how I use this particular tool. So we're going to make sure that we're on the lasso tool, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just going to start blocking in the shape that basically encompasses the drawing. Okay. So we're going to go ahead. Okay. To select more, now you can do a couple things here. You can move your selection, okay, by clicking on the inside. Okay. Or if you hit shift, now watch, if you hit shift, a different tool appears. It looks like a lasso tool with a plus right there. Okay, you see that? So what basically this is going to do is everything that I click on the inside, oops, control. So we're going to go ahead and go back. Make sure they're on the light layer. Lasso. Okay. It's doing weird things. Hold on. Deselect. Okay. Select. Deselect. It's my pen remote stopped working. Okay, we'll try it again. There we go. Sometimes it does that. It's the communication with the dongle on the side. Back to the lasso tool. Here, we're going to hit shift. Okay, we're going to draw on the inside, and we're going to continue. Now, it's not a simple click or a press. It's a shift, brings up the tool. Now, I'm going to basically draw using the drawing as a template to make the selection. Okay, you can zoom in and out. Again, if I were to click here and draw in, it expands that selection. Now I got to make sure that I'm on the right layer. Okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to go ahead and just start filling all these in. You can see that rather quickly you can fill in and create that shape that I want. And I'm going to tell you why I'm going to use a shape instead of just going in and coloring. Okay. All right. Make sure we don't miss anything. Let's go ahead. I always like to zoom out just to see where the running ants are, because the running ants, you know, whenever you get zoomed in, they get really tiny. But whenever you come out like this, you can really understand and see where your selection is. Making sure we're on the right layer, which we are. Making sure we have the correct color or value, which I do. Edit, fill, foreground color. Boom. So select, deselect. Select. Oh, I selected layer. Oh, I'm sorry. Select. Deselect. Okay, so now you see that I have a value shape. Let's go ahead and get rid of the sketch. Boom. So now you can see the silhouette. And this is just here for the purposes of placing in the color where I want it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new layer. New layer. In Photoshop, there's an action treatment to the layer called the layer mask. And this is very similar to what you would find in Procreate, Krita, and some of the other programs that are out there. And what's really cool about it, and I'm going to show you, so I'm going to go over and hover over the layer that I just created, and I'm going to hit the Alt key. So whenever I hit the Alt key and I come to the border, now if I don't hit the Alt key, nothing happens. Okay, now this layer doesn't have anything on it right now. Okay, I don't have any layer transparency, I don't have it filled, I don't have any sketch. But whenever I go ahead and I hit the Alt key and I drag it down, you see a little box that comes down with an arrow. The second I click that, this becomes a layer mask. Now, you're like, well, why is that important? The layer mask is something that's really cool because now I can use this entire shape to help me stay within the lines and the confines of the silhouette. Okay? Since I have that shape behind there, I can now go in. Let's say I choose, let's go ahead and move this over. Again, you can tell this particular film on here is not the size of my screen, so I'm having to kind of facilitate and jockey around so I don't hit this edge and damage my pen. The film is actually for an iPad, so my apologies for that, but you get the understanding of why I'm doing it. So we're going to go ahead and do a flesh tone, a little bit pasty, maybe here, right around, let's go right around there, a little bit warmer. Okay. So now what I like to do, okay, so there's a couple things I can do. I can come over here to my brush. Here's my favorite brush. And I can start drawing and painting inside. Now look, it's not going outside of the confines of this particular shape because I have that layer mask on there. I don't have to worry about going outside of the proverbial lines. I'm going to go back to my shape here and very quickly, or not shape, my lasso tool, and very quickly I can start blocking in color. And I can do it in such a way that doesn't hurt any of the other layers. So I still have my sketch layer. I still have my silhouette layer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to block in. Okay, edit, fill, foreground color. Select, deselect. And you can see that it basically uses this background shape to block in the color hue that I want. Now, there is an alternate way to do this, okay? You're like, well, why didn't you show me that to begin with? Well, because again, this is the way that I do it. This is the way that I didn't quote unquote learn how to do it this way, because in my career, I've learned how to do things a myriad of different ways. And this way tends to speak to me the most. You're going to find that in the realm of programs, certain things will speak to you in certain ways that help in your workflow. And this tended to help me in my workflow. Okay. So now I can go back to my lasso tool, and I've got this particular color on a layer, and I want to keep it on a layer because I don't want it going and now I can do a couple things. I can go ahead and put, a brown color, and I can start putting in, and you notice even the selection goes outside of the confines of that silhouette. Whenever you see me fill it, it's not going to have any issue because, again, it is a layer mask, and it's masking those pixels that are outside the confines of the silhouette. So let's go ahead and hit Edit, Fill, Foreground Color. Select, Deselect. Okay. Sorry about that. I had to close the window that's in front of me. Okay, so now let's go back. Make his mustache a little bit darker. And you can see how I don't really have to worry about those edges. Edit, fill, foreground color, select, deselect. And again, if I had a keyboard, I'd hit Control D, and I'd have an action for it and go really fast, so I wouldn't have to really worry about going up to those tabs up top. That's not really, edit, again, edit, fill, foreground color, select, so on and so forth. Okay, you get the gist. So now there's an alternate way to do this. Okay, now I am on a layer mask, so let's go over here to the left-hand side, and we're going to go to the freeform pen tool. Okay, now the freeform pen tool is very similar in respect to the lasso tool. The lasso tool, however, after you create it, creates what? A selection. The freeform pen tool does a couple things. Now we're going to watch. Okay, so let's go down to his shirt. I'm going to give him a blue shirt. Okay, up here, remember we talked about how every single time you change your tool, it changes the variable parameters that you can set up here in this little tab window. So right now, I've got it set to shape, okay? And I've got it set with a fill, and I can specify what color I want. By default, it goes to the foreground color, and I can specify it to have a stroke. Now, and I can specify how wide I want the stroke. So we're going to experiment really quick. I'm going to actually create a secondary layer up here just for giggles. We're going to go ahead and hide the other layers. This layer, again, has no effects on it or anything. We've changed tools from the lasso tool down to the pen tool. The pen tool, whenever we hold long and it expands, you can see there's quite a few things going on here. I typically don't use the curvature pen tool, the add anchor pen tool, delete anchor pen tool, or the convert point tool. These are things that are available, but I just don't really use them. I typically will use the freeform pen tool first, and if I'm working in photographs and doing selections, I will use the pen tool. But we're going to start out with the freeform pen tool. Again, we're going to have it as a shape with a fill and no stroke. Now watch what happens. Okay, and you're like, wow, well, why didn't we just do that to begin with? I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to show you here in a second. We're going to do a secondary color. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to do a third. Let's do a brown. Whoops, sorry. Okay. Now we're going to do a third shape. Okay. And we're going to change the color. Okay. So over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see a little tab. Okay. This is called a shape path. And I'm utilizing the path, basically the path tool. It creates a path. And it's a live shape layer. And every single time that I create a different shape, it creates a different layer with a live shape. And you can see every time I change the location, okay, you can basically manipulate and change those shapes and colors. So now we're going to select that one. Edit. Here's the fill. We can change the color of it. So you're like, okay, that's pretty handy, but this looks like a complete mess. It can be a mess, okay? But I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift, go down to the bottom. It selects all three shapes. That's pretty cool. And then I can actually go Layer, Merge Shapes. Okay. Unfortunately, whenever you merge shapes, then it's going to use whatever fill color that is currently selected, and it's going to merge all the shapes. So what I can do is I can go ahead and create a new layer. I can select all of them, layer, merge layers, and look what happened. So now I have all three shapes merged into one, and all the colors stay the same. Okay, so now, what if I want to go ahead and do what I did before, layer, and it's going to basically cause all three of these to be this particular fill, So I'm going to layer, merge shapes. Now watch what happens. I'm going to use the control button. While I'm in the pen tool, I'm going to go ahead and click, go back to my path, tab. I'm going to select in there and watch what happens. Now this is really cool because I can change the shape even though these are all one layer live. I can still change the paths, because if you look on here, each path might be on one layer, shape path, but I can still change the shape of it. So this is pretty cool. Again, we're changing all of them because we're on one path. If you want them to stay separate colors, they have to be separate live paths. So just for giggles, because I think this is something that probably needs to be shown, this down here, we're going to go ahead and do this particular, let's do light blue. Okay, light blue. Okay, getting up from the chair. I have a special chair here, and man, I just hit my shin. Woo! Took my breath away. Okay, so now I want to show you something. So if I want to go ahead and do the color, and notice how it fills it, and I don't even have to press the shift button. Now here's the caveat to that. Notice how I went way out. And I don't really want to do that because, again, I'm trying to put in color flats and keep it within the confines of that shape. And I can do that really fast. So what I do is I hit Shift. I'm on that top live layer. I hit Shift and I hit Layer and I hit Merge Shapes. I add a layer underneath. And now I'm going to layer, merge layers. And now that's out. I'm going to go ahead and make that part of the layer mask. Now I can do a couple things. Layer. See, I can go ahead and click that in. I've created a separate layer mask for that particular color. And I go ahead and fill that last part there. Edit, fill, foreground. And layer, select, deselect. See what I mean by you can do the same thing in multiple different ways? It's important that you guys remember that Photoshop, again, is a multi-user type program. It doesn't have one specific function, but it has a myriad of functions that is kind of like a Swiss Army knife, and it has tons of tools in here, and we're just literally scratching the surface. So now we talked about, so what have we done? We've put down our color flats for this particular layer, and I can go back and I can hide, again, I can hide the sketch layer, and I can hide, you know, I want that silhouette to be there. So if I hide the silhouette, it's going to affect the layer above it, because all these layers right here are connected to the silhouette layer. Okay, so again, you know, once we get to a spot that we like, I'm going to go ahead and block in the brown, the lighter. Actually, we're going to do a darker brown. So let's go ahead and let's do a darker brown. And, you know, in the midst of doing things, if you don't want to go back to the lasso tool, that's completely fine. You can basically switch over to your paintbrush. And if you're like, well, I just want to start painting, that's fine too. If you've got it on that clipping mask, that layer mask right there, that is no issue at all. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select white. And again, I'm on my active layer mask paint layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and block in the whites of his eyes. And then I'm going to have, maybe he's got some nice green eyes, right? Hit that rotate tool and start putting in some of the green hue. Now we're going to go to a darker hue. Put in that dark of the pupil. Okay, so we're going to do a darker brown here. And if you're like, oh, if you accidentally go out, it's not going to make a difference because you have that layer mask on. Okay, go back. Okay, not bad. Hit save. It has saved. Then you're like, wait a minute. So you messed up right here. You have some other areas that you've messed up. Well, here's the deal. If it had been a very tight sketch, okay, and I was interested in keeping everything within the confines of that, there is another way. Of course, there's another way. So let's go ahead and hide. Let's go ahead and duplicate. So let's layer, duplicate layer, and it's going to ask me if that's what I want to do. Yes, I'm duplicating the layer. So now I have 2 sketch layers. I'm going to place that at the top, and I'm going to hide the rest of the layers. Okay, so now if this was a really fine line, if I had used an inker, something like, let's say, like a hard round, okay? If I used a hard round, you can see whenever I zoom in, even though there's anti-aliasing going on, anti-aliasing being there's like a step process of how the pixels go from a full fill over to a tapering off, okay? And so if I were to do, let's say this right here, let's go ahead and turn off pressure. So it's maximum opacity. Actually, let's do this. Maximum opacity. And I want to fill this area. There's a couple ways I can do this. There's something called the magic lasso tool. The magic wand tool. Okay, and then there's the quick selection tool. Object selection tool, quick selection tool, magic wand. Magic wand tends to be something that people like to gravitate to. I gotta be honest with you, I don't use the magic wand hardly at all because you're allowing the computer to basically do the work for you. Up here, again, we've changed tools. You can change all the parameters. And again, here's that word anti-aliasing. If I want it to anti-alias, it's going to select up to the pixel blur, and then it's going to select slightly into it. Now, if I do no anti-aliasing, it's going to go right to the pixel density that's maximum, okay? And it's going to be a harder edge. That doesn't always work right. So point sample, I typically do 3x3 average because it's 3x3 average as far as 3 pixels this way, 3 pixels that way, 3 pixels that way from the center of the selection. And the tolerance has to do with, again, how far up you're going to go to the pixel density at its maximum value. So if I hit this, since I'm on this layer, we're going to click on the inside. Now look, this is what I was talking about. So again, we have a tolerance at 32, 3x3 selection. So we haven't quite selected everything all the way up to the maximum pixel density. So we're going to hit deselect. Now we're going to go up to, I don't know, let's do, hold on just a sec. I have to go back. I have to come, I have to bring that. Okay, so let's do 10. Okay, tolerance of 10. Now it's going to, again, pull back. Now, it has to do, again, with going up to that pixel density. So let's do no anti-aliasing. So let's select, deselect. Now look, okay? So no anti-aliasing. It's going to go all the way to the blur out. That's where, digitally speaking, this color ends. So if I were to go and put this all the way up to like 45, Okay. That's it, deselect, filter, I'm sorry, select, deselect. Let's go to bring this up to like 45 with no anti-aliasing. Again, we're on that layer. I think it did the whole thing. Okay, no, we're fine. So now it's a hard edge, okay? So let's go anti-aliasing. We're gonna do 45 tolerance, which will go as far in as it can. Select, deselect. Okay. And see how it went from all the way out here? Now it's getting into that area of anti-aliasing. Okay. So again, if I were to go ahead and fill that, now watch. I'm going to add a layer underneath. Remember, Control. I'm going to say I want it to be filled with that color. Edit, fill, foreground color. And we're going to hit deselect. Now look what happened. There's a halo. Even though the magic wand is good and you can specify certain things and parameters, a lot of times when you want things up to a specific area, and of course I used a brush, I didn't use a inking brush, I didn't use a path. All these things are variables that you have to remember whenever you work in an environment like this, you know? So that's why a lot of times what I'll do, and you know, this is something that obviously comes with experience. So if I want that completely filled with no halo under it, I can do a couple things. I can use this. Remember we talked about putting this in there, and that's going to take a little while, and that's kind of ridiculous, right? Okay, and I'm going to go and I'm going to create a layer underneath, and then edit, fill, foreground color, and layer, select, deselect. So now there is no halo. Because why? Because I have two separate layers, and this particular color underneath extends beyond the border of the color on top. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Another way that you can do it is you take your magic wand, you select the outside, and then you hit select, inverse. Now I've selected only that shape. And you're like, okay, we'll go ahead and fill. But if I fill, I'm going to have some area right here. So instead, I'm going to hit select, modify, and I'm going to hit contract. And I can specify how many pixels in. So I'm going to say probably maybe 15. Whoops, that's too much. Maybe 3. That's weird. Oh, okay, so let's go ahead, hit Control. I went back too far with my Control Z. Make sure that we've selected, good. And then we hit select, modify, contract. You can expand, you can smooth border. You can actually create a path, but instead we're just going to contract, and we're going to say 2 pixels. Okay. And then edit, fill, foreground color. Now I've got a nice fill, okay, and I've got that line on top. And if I want to go ahead and merge these two, because currently they're on separate layers, see, I can move an object from where I want it to be, and instead layer, merge down, and then now we have these on one layer. See, again, we're talking about so many different ways to do the same thing that a lot of times it becomes a little confusing, especially when you have somebody trying to tell you and show you what to do, and that is quote unquote the right way. In Photoshop, you know, there's that old adage, there's the right way, and then there's your way, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it the wrong way. It means you're doing it the way that works for you. So we're going to go back to our color flats again, and we can start putting in value on that layer, or if you want, we can actually create a separate, let's go ahead and have this layer. Whoops. We're going to merge down. I merged that top layer mask. Now we have all our color flats on one layer. So we're going to go ahead and create an additional layer, and we're going to make it a layer mask. Remember, press Alt. So now what we can do is we can create a shadow layer, and I typically use a cooler value for my shadows, and depending on what I'm doing at the particular point in time, if I want a texture, I choose a simple brush. Now this one is pretty stout. By default, it was on shade. Good. I want the taper off. So now I can start just blocking in my shadows. Now, I think I touched on this last session, possibly. I talked about the layer transparency mode. So each layer you can specify to have a specific mode that it will interact with the layer below it. So since this is a layer mask and it's going to be a shadow layer, I'm going to use the multiply. And I think what that does is it multiplies the color underneath, and depending on what color you specify. So it's going to interact, watch, it's going to interact with that value a little bit different than it will with the green. Okay, and if you look, the green actually is dark green. Now I've specified a cooler value here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to just start barely putting in some of the values for his shading. Let's say the light's coming over the right-hand side, so this is going to have a nice shadow. It's going to be dark underneath. And we can basically, not too much. Okay. And every time it goes over itself, it gets darker. And this is really a nice way, again, to block in your shadows, you know, your values quickly, you know. Oh, it's really cool. Watch, I'm going to show you guys here in a second. Double click. I can change the opacity of this particular layer at any point in time. Okay. So now I'm going to come back here, and you're like, well, layer transparency and compositing is really cool, but what if I want to do something while I'm on this paint layer? What's really cool is when we click on the brush, you have the same options up here. So let's go, I want to turn red or pinkish hue, and I'm working on the actual paint layer, the color flat layer. Just remember, once you paint on this layer, you can't go back and select that color. So I'm going to go ahead and down to color, and I can change the opacity of how dark I want my brush to be. You notice it's got a transparency to it because it's interacting with the layer underneath. I'm changing the color based upon the pressure of the hue underneath. Okay. Now, if you've studied faces and you understand the dynamic of faces, you realize that faces are full of different colors. And you got to realize, too, that whenever I'm doing stuff on this base layer, this particular layer on top, this multiply, it still hasn't been touched, but it will react different because you're putting a different color underneath. So I have this green color that typically appears in areas of less blood flow, and then you have more red in areas of more blood flow, obviously. Okay. All right. And his ears typically are going to be nice and blood flowy. Okay. All right. So now we've understood, and we've used the pen tool. We've used the lasso tool, and I did talk about the polygonal lasso tool. Again, polygonal meaning polygons, so you can select how it interacts. Now with the freeform lasso tool, we're going to come up here. With the freeform lasso tool, remember, we did just a freeform, okay, and then it selects. Now with the polygonal lasso tool, whenever we long hold, basically what it's going to do is it's going to create polygons. Well, a polygonal shape. And then it's going to select it for you. This is very handy whenever you do really geometric shapes. So like if I were to go ahead and do this, click, and then what's cool is if you don't think you can get it completely straight, just click the shift key and it'll shift it. It'll snap it for you. Here, 45 degrees, here. So that's really cool if you want to do, like if I were to do a background, here we'll do a really quick background. So let's go here. Oops. Okay. So let's go here. Shift. Okay, so now we hit edit, fill, foreground color, and select deselect. So you can basically block in a nice geometric shape in the background and make it sort of like a cityscape if you want to. Pretty simple. Okay, so we put in our color flats. We've put a little bit of shading, a little bit of hue, a little bit of color change. We've understood a little bit more about the layers palette and also the transparency modes. One of the things you always have to remember, if you've changed your transparency mode in your brush, look, you have to change it back to normal if you want it to react normal. I've actually left it and gone in and started painting stuff and completely messed everything up because I forgot to change it back to normal mode. And that, unfortunately, is something that, you as a artist and as a person in digital illustration, you really have to watch and do layer management and understand that settings will stay the same that you set them as long as, you've set them that way. You have to change them back. So the rectangular marquee tool we've haven't looked at. So this is the rectangular marquee tool up here on the left-hand side. What would you use this for? Well, I use it primarily for just large selections. Whenever it does a predetermined, you can basically select. If you hit shift, you can select again. It'll expand your selection, select, so on and so forth. And I think, what is it? Select, Control Shift, Alt Shift. I forget what it is. I know it on my keyboard. And you can select again and it'll subtract the selection. So that has to do with the rectangular. So if I go down and I long hold, I go to the elliptical, which is basically a circle. So now I hit shift again and it expands. This is really handy if you're doing, large scale photo manipulation or illustration. You can really get some large areas mapped out pretty quickly. And again, since we're on a separate layer, I can hit edit, fill, foreground, and deselect. And then suddenly I have a shape. Now we're not going to do transform today. We're just still learning about, drawing, layer management, simple selection tools. And to do the transform, I really need my keyboard to do the transform and deselect and all of that. So I think we'll do that on the next video. But as far as, understanding what's going on in your paths, we learned a little bit about that by using the pen tool. We learned the lasso tool. We learned the polygonal lasso tool. We did the freeform tool. So let's go to here. We did the freeform pen. So if we do the pen tool again, right, and we start selecting, and we talked about how that, has the potential to be a fill. So let's go back. You can actually, if you were to take it, and instead of doing a fill, you do a path, and you can say make selection. So let's make sure that we're on a separate layer. So let's go ahead and here, 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 here. And you just really want to cut something out. So now you noticed it went from having the modifiable little nodes, okay? We've closed it in. So now you're like, well, how do I make it a selection? Well, over here on the path tablet or section, you select it, and then now I can make it a selection. Okay, and since this, you know, you can fill it, you can go down and you can select something. Let's say I want to copy and paste this area, so I can hit layer. I'm sorry, layer image copy. You can tell that I don't usually use the. Well, let's just do a fill. So we'll do edit, fill. Oh, see, it deleted it. So you can tell here, delete, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and hit layer. Sorry, select, deselect. Okay. And if you just want to get rid of that particular path, you can go ahead and just get rid of it, and it's gone. You hit the little trash can, and it's gone. Okay, so now that we've kind of landed, you know, and if you don't want to have all of these layers and you feel like it's just too much, you can basically select your layer masks, shift down to your main shape, and you hit layer, merge layers, and then now you've got your layers on one, not layers, you've got your color flats on one layer, if you want to have everything on one layer. Okay, so hopefully I didn't completely mess and blow your mind up. Hopefully I didn't destroy your your viewpoint of what you know, what certain tools are and how they can benefit you. Here's the deal, and this is something that I tell everybody that's learning this program. You're going to get the most out of this program by experimentation. So you saw me merge these layers, the color flats. Now you're like, well, I want to go in and I want to start painting. Okay, that's fine. Here's the deal. You notice how I paint on this particular layer, and even if I were to go above it, I don't have a layer mask above it. If I just want to paint on this layer and I don't want to go outside of the confines of where the color is currently, this little icon I mentioned last session that looks like a little flag, that's the layer transparency lock, basically. Go ahead and click it. It's hard to see. So now I'm going to choose a really bright color, just for giggles. And notice, all of my paint stays within the confines of these pixels on this particular layer. Okay? And if I want to go in, I want to change. Let's say I want to make this a warmer hue. Okay, so let's go ahead and make it a warmer hue. Kind of yellow. And again, I can go back up. Remember, we talked about this. So I can go to overlay. And it's going to interact on that layer as overlay. Now, if I want this on a separate layer, I can do that. I go ahead and click off of this. I go ahead and add a layer on top, and we just put our layer mask and we specify this as overlay. And I get the same basic effect. And now, if I don't like it, I can control it. Whereas if I was down here and I was doing that, I couldn't control it and come back from it. If that makes any sense. That's a big mouthful of gobbledygook words. Okay, let's go ahead and do a background really quick. Add, let's do this color right here. Really big. Always remember, working in layers is going to be your friend. As much as, you know, a lot of us painters, you know, really get in here and want to flatten everything and do things that, you know, give nice, you know, nice brush effect. Layer management is very important because it helps you have the ability to change things that, you know, after the fact. And in a professional environment, it's important that you guys realize change is good, right? Change means you have your client that is thinking, as I do things here, is thinking about how it can be better. You know, if they ask you, oh, I don't like the color of the hat, you know, that might be a challenge. If you don't know how to use Photoshop, you know, you can change the color of the hat. You can select it, you can do a hue shift, or, you know, I can come back on top of it. There's my layer mask. I can say, okay, we're going to do a blue hat. Okay. And you're like, wait a minute, what happened to all my shadows? Well, you're like, well, hold on there, Slim. Let's go ahead and change that to color. And now, look, all your shadows stay the same. All your values stay the same. All I'm doing is changing the color because I'm using that layer transparency effect on top of the color flat. Okay. And then they're like, well, let me show me some ways that I can, or not show me some ways, show me some different colorways of the hat. So then you can come up to image. Now we're going to come up here to image. We're going to go to adjustment, and we're going to go to hue saturation. And now I can change the color of the hat at will. Green. Okay. However I want to. Cancel. So hopefully that gets you guys a better understanding of how to use the lasso tool, the marquee tool, the magic wand tool, the pen tool, the freeform pen tool, and the boxes over here on the left-hand side from foreground to background color. And then we talked about using the different layer modes and also layer masks and color flats and transparency modes, color transparency modes, and how to utilize those. Remember, if you mess up, here's your friend right here. Your history palette. I think by default, Photoshop is like 100 or 500. It's something ridiculous. The thing is the more history you have, the more it's going to store it in the cache, and it's going to eat up your RAM. So you have the possibility of Photoshop running slow depending on the number of histories that you have. I keep mine probably around 20. And if I wanted to go back, I can go back if I make a mistake. Okay? So hopefully this puts you guys in a good spot as far as understanding how to put in color flats, which is basically color with no value on it. It's only hue, so color with no light or shade. And then you can go in and start playing around with the layer compositing. Compositing being when looked from above, you see an image, but whenever you look at from the side, it is comprised of multiple layers, and how those layers interact with each other gives you that end result. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to go ahead and figure out what the next video is going to be. Hopefully you guys learned something today. And you know, definitely like and subscribe, share. I'm trying to make these videos as much as I can and as quickly as I can in the midst of what I'm doing in my professional career. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And what's really cool, guys, listen, I know Photoshop is very daunting. I know it's hard. I get that. It took me a very long time to understand, you know, the dynamic of how to use this program in a positive way. But what's really cool is a lot of the things that you're going to find in Photoshop will lend itself to other programs. You're like, well, what does that mean? It means that a lot of the quick keys, a lot of the things that you're going to learn in this program will be the same as if you learn maybe in Illustrator, maybe in InDesign. You know, a lot of those quick keys, you know, maybe in Clip Studio Paint, maybe in Rebel, a lot of them are the same. And they do this, I think, by design, just because, you know, Photoshop is that standard. It's been around probably the longest. And, you know, it's a program that really is robust. And once you learn this program, they say it's like once you learn Photoshop, you can pretty much learn any program. And that is completely true. So that's all I wanted to show you guys today. Go out and do something today, draw something, and definitely like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.